I was born in Turkey in the 1980s, to a Turkish father and a British mother. I've always felt comfort in the idea of a creator, and the idea of another life after this one. I've never really considered the idea of there being nothing. It seems almost ridiculous to think that we just appeared on this tiny planet without explanation, and when we die, we just disappear without a trace. Evidence of the paranormal is notoriously hard to come by, but perhaps people have been looking in the wrong places. All it would take is one cast iron piece of proof to change everything.
From an early age, as young as I can remember, I was terrified of the devil. This fear stayed with me into adulthood, but work and everyday life intervened, and I gave it less and less thought. In my 30s, over a period of about 18 months, I went from being an Anglican Christian to an agnostic, and finally a fully fledged atheist. Even though I'm utterly convinced by atheism, there's still so much that science struggles to explain. I don't believe in spirits, ghosts, or demons. I think they're nothing more than inventions of our collective imagination.
As a believer
and a non-believer, we've decided to look into as many facets of the supernatural as we can. I want to be challenged and have my take on the paranormal questioned.
I want to show that supernatural phenomena are just aspects of our universe that we simply don't fully understand yet.
We'll speak to experts in the field on both sides of the argument.
Psychics, skeptics, demon hunters,
and academics, to see if we can finally discern if there really is something on the other side.
Previously on Secrets of the Paranormal World.
I believe that many hauntings and ghosts are absolutely genuine.
We are very good at justifying things to ourselves.
There are thought to be several types of psychic phenomena. The first is known as telepathy and is often referred to as mind reading or ESP. There are generally regarded to be four main types of telepathy. Latent or deferred telepathy is the transfer of information from the mind of one person to the mind of another. Retrocognitive telepathy is the theory that a person's history and memory can be extracted from one person's mind to another. Emotive telepathy draws on the idea that physical feelings and sensations can be transferred between two individuals. Finally, superconscious telepathy suggests that a collective consciousness can be accessed to gather common ideas. Some people have suggested that this type of hive mind theory is used by social insects. There is still little hard evidence to support the existence of telepathy, although several high-level experiments have been carried out over the years. Whilst there have been isolated incidents of positive results, these often falter under scrutiny and repeat experiments. Another type of psychic phenomena is known as telekinesis or psychokinesis. This theorizes that a person can use their mind to manipulate or move objects or physically influence other people without physical interaction. Clairvoyance is a popular and enduring psychic phenomena. Again, this is the idea that a practitioner can use their mind to collect information remotely, but more often concerning events occurring in the future or far away, and relay this information back to a subject. One skeptic, magician James Randi, has a long-standing offer, now $1 million to anyone who proves a genuine psychic power under proper observing conditions. Thus far, the prize has gone unclaimed.
Now, there are lots of biases in the way that our minds work that we're just not aware of, and these can be exploited to give the impression that people have psychic ability when maybe they don't. So to give you one specific example, if ever I'm doing a talk, I will demonstrate my own psychic abilities by transmitting a thought from my mind into the audience's mind. And I'll say, I'm going to keep it very simple. I'm going to transmit a number between 1 and 10, but not 3 because that's too obvious. So make a mental note of the first one that comes into your head now. And I can pretty much guarantee that about a third of the audience will go for the number 7. Now, it doesn't matter what I'm thinking of, about a third of the audience will go for the number 7. We're not sure exactly why it happens. We know that people tend to avoid the extremes. People try to go for something they feel is the most random thing that they can come up with, and 7 seems to fit the bill. And also, you've ruled out 3 because you've said explicitly don't go for 3. So you'll reliably get a kind of grouping around the number 7. Not everybody will get it, but around about a third.
Most skeptics will analyse the fact that we trick ourselves. The old scenario of look into a bunch of, clouds. Let's see. You look into clouds and you'll see faces, because we train ourselves to see faces. So therefore, your eyes don't work very well at night because of the way that they're organised. So therefore, you're going to see shadows and think it's human form. So skeptics will have an angle on that side of it, which is understandable, which is fine. It's what you can't explain that is where they get stuck.
I didn't have anyone to consult with, but the scientists that tested me, I learned so much from them, from people like Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut who was a 6th man on the moon. He tested me. Dr. Werner von Braun. We're talking about major institutions like Goddard the Space Laboratory, the Lawrence Livermore Radiation Labs where they build nuclear weapons, Stanford Research Institute, which is Stanford University today, Foch Hospital, the Lawrence Livermore, the American Naval Surface Weapons Center. So all these people around the world help me understand what I'm dealing with. I believe that I validated my telekinetic powers at Stanford Research Institute. It was under control condition. The film is there available for you to see on my website. It was cheat-proof conditions. I don't care what other magicians say, that there was this, there was that. Everyone, skeptics will always find a loophole. But PK exists. It's basically unexplored, it's undeveloped in our human mind. I think that in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5,000 years from now, everybody will be able to move objects from one place to the other.
We decided to conduct our own psychic experiment based around the classical Zener card test, designed by psychologist Carl Zener in the early 1930s.
We assembled several test subjects, including believers, non-believers, and those who believe themselves to be psychic. The tester would draw 25 cards. 5 circle cards, 5 star cards, 5 blank cards, 5 triangle cards, and 5 cross cards.
The tester would draw a card and picture it mentally. The subject would then attempt to read the tester's mind and identify the correct card. A subject with no psychic ability would be expected to achieve a 20% success rate when guessing the cards based on the mathematics of probability.
During our test, regardless of belief or ability, all of the subjects achieved between a 15 and 25% success rate, directly in line with random probability.
As far as our tests were concerned, none of the subjects exhibited any measurable psychic ability.
In addition to the Xena tests, we also contacted psychic mediums and conducted a spirit sitting and readings of various photographs.
We wanted to see if any degree of accuracy could be recorded under controlled conditions. However, the results were so wildly inaccurate that we had chosen out of courtesy not to identify the mediums personally.
Over the years, I've visited many psychics and had readings of various kinds. Some seemed highly accurate and some much less so. Back in our hometown, I'd noticed that one such medium had opened up a shop, advertising tarot readings, so I set up our concealed camera and booked a sitting.
Something is going to change very quickly with you, because this is the Wheel of Fortune, and the Wheel of Fortune is indicative of a twist of fate. Something's heading your way, and that will turn everything on its head, and that's what it means, but let's see. And that will bring you to some decision making, as the Page of Wands is all about decisions. This is the start of the decision process. And there might be decisions that you really don't want to make. It's normally battling with the illness, battling with pain, and sometimes it could be with business battles. And this will leave you with physical and emotional scars, and it's not over yet.
It was a bit of a weird one as well, obviously, going in, because it wasn't something I wanted to do. I went in to do it for the documentary. So going in with a different frame of mind already puts you in a bit of a different mood. So I think the first thing she said, the card actually I picked was the life card, and she mentioned that someone young in our family will be diagnosed with something that cannot be helped. And at the time I thought, that's a bit weird. I think it's more about, there wasn't anything I wanted to hear in there. So I was quite frustrated, and I think the more frustrated I got, the more she struggled to actually say anything, because I guess people go in there, they so desperately want to hear something that anything they'll say, they'll go yes, yes, where I didn't give any kind of sign of anything she said linked to my life, if that makes sense. So that's pretty much what she said, and she just babbled on about the same thing and asked me the same question, can I relate to that, can I relate to this? So that's about it really. It wasn't a great experience. So at the time, I went in there with what I wanted to hear, what was important for me. However, the things she did say, out of especially one of them, kind of did come true. She did say that someone young in our family will be diagnosed with something that she can't help, it's life. and Sophia got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So I guess that could be accurate, or is it a chance? But yeah, so that kind of that did freak me out a tiny bit. Yeah. Throughout my life, I've been to many psychics. Some of them being absolutely brilliant, some of them being really rubbish, and I mean, especially a few have said very accurate things. But again, I'm a woman in my late 20s who is looking to move into a house, get married. So they all said things related to that. I find it quite interesting that they all use similar phrases. They'll never tell you a specific time, date, colour, gender, or anything like that. They'll always say, I want to say, or they'll give you a margin, let's say for an age between 25 and 40 by looking at your age. I don't know, it's almost like a bit of a guesswork where they try to cover every aspect of what they want you to think. It could be quite interesting if we could do a hypercut on every psychic I've been to and cut the words back to back and see how similar they are.
Would you understand with yourself where, and it's not the same reason as this lady, would you understand with yourself where when you become stressed you become a little bit more forgetful? Would you understand where there's times where you need to take a step back? Would you understand where her rings are here with somebody? Now, would you understand a connection to Germany?
I'm half Turkish, half English, so I've only been living in the UK for the past 6 years now. And I would say the psychics started to get things wrong for me when I moved to this country. In Turkey, there's a certain way your culture, your life develops. So, I don't know, you finish high school, you go to university, you graduate, you're expected to get a job. You get married, you move into a house, you have children. So there's a certain expectancy of your life standard and the way you're going to live. But when I moved to England, it was quite interesting because they have a different way of living or a different culture or a different way they see things. So I found in England, some of the psychics got things quite badly wrong when it comes to cultural things. So I had one psychic telling me that she saw one of my grandparents eating tabbouleh. Now, tabbouleh is not a Turkish dish, but she tried to do a very, shall we say, an uneducated guess to see what, in her mind, to what Turkish people ate. Psychics also get things right. Very general things, I would say. Maybe, again, many cultures, even if you don't get a house, you move into a house. As humans, majority of us, I'm not saying all of us, we do want to have a partner, we want to get married, we want to fall in love, we want to have children, so those kind of things they may get right. They told me I was going to get married, move into a house. Yep, it's happened, but doesn't it happen to many of us, really? So there you go, that's really it.
I would make a huge distinction between, on the one hand, paranormal practitioners, whether they be psychics, mediums, astrologers, tarot card readers, alternative medicine, whatever, those who actually believe in the system that they are pushing, on the one hand, which in my experience is most of them, and on the other hand, the deliberate con artists. And there are deliberate con artists out there, there's no doubt about it. There are people who don't believe for 1 minute in whatever it is that they're selling, but they're doing it purely out of profit. And I think morally the two are at kind of opposite poles, obviously. Those who sincerely believe in what they're pushing, they can still unintentionally do a lot of damage. Sometimes they can do some good as well. But the ones at the other end, the ones who are the deliberate con artists who are just exploiting vulnerable people, I mean, they are the ones that I, really have no time for at all, and I would condemn them at every opportunity.
Many people have claimed to possess telekinetic powers, including Russian psychic Nina Kulagina, who was filmed and tested at length by the Russian authorities during the 60s and 70s.
There's something about when you look at that footage, it feels so authentic. And it's easy to forget that all of that footage and all of that research was part of a propaganda war that was going on at the time. So the Russians were investigating and releasing this footage of sort of physical effects, psychokinesis and so on, whereby people like Kulagina could move things and stop. I think she stopped a frog's heart or something at one point. This idea that the Russians might be able to kill you psychically. America, meanwhile, was doing remote viewing and providing its own, sort of counterbalance to that. An interesting thing I heard, which I wonder if it's true, is that the whole idea of remote viewing might have been to cover spies that were out in Moscow, because if you had somebody who was actually in the Moscow office that could report on a document, how do you explain you had that information other than a spy? Well, one way of explaining it is to say that it was done through remote viewing.
Remote viewing is the practice of visualizing and gathering information about a location or other target from a separate location using only the power of the mind. A remote viewer will often use map coordinates or other stimuli to begin their session, usually culminating in a drawing or visual information about a target. The term remote viewing was purportedly coined in the 1970s by Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff, two parapsychology researchers at the Stanford Research Institute. Targ and Puthoff would go on to test many people with suspected psychic ability, including a young Israeli called Uri Geller. As rumors of a well-funded Soviet psychotronic research program began to surface, the Americans followed suit in order to limit any Soviet tactical advantage. Remote viewing was exploited on a multi-agency level in the US between the mid-70s and mid-90s, when it was purportedly shut down due to a lack of reliable results. The most famous of these units was established in 1978 at Fort Meade in Maryland and comprised of only 15 to 20 individuals. It went through many name changes and side projects, eventually being collected together underneath the singular moniker of Project Stargate. After the declassification of the project in the 1990s, many of the key participants, including Ingo Swann and David Morehouse, went on to give interviews, write books, and give lectures on the subject. Ingo Swann often recounted places that he'd viewed remotely, including one underground installation that he claimed was conducting chemical and biological experiments on animals and humans. He divulged this information to his seniors, and it proved to be accurate. According to Swann, the installation was destroyed some years hence. Many long-time remote viewers experienced emotional and mental health issues, which they put down to their prolonged exposure to the paranormal. Despite confirmations that all US remote viewing units have been shut down, there is still a school of opinion that the CIA maintains an RV capability, and academic research on the matter still continues.
Remote viewing would be fantastic, wouldn't it, if you could do it? Can you imagine how potent, how powerful it would be to be used by governments? You know, you could weaponize it. And really, the subject got a far larger profile as a result of Project Stargate, which was the American government looking into the possibility of this. It was closed down in the 1990s because the results were so poor. There really is no evidence, no particularly good evidence to support it.
If this really worked, then obviously it would be an amazing advance in terms of military intelligence and so on. So the question is, well, does it work? Well, having spent $20 million, which sounds like a huge amount of money, but you look at this in terms of the overall American defense budget, it's a tiny, tiny, minuscule drop in the ocean, but still a lot of money to most of us, let's face it. What the American government did was to get two people to review the evidence that had come out from the Stargate project. One of them was a woman called Jessica Utz, who is a statistician who is known to be very, very sympathetic towards paranormal claims, and the other one was Ray Hyman, who is an American psychologist who is known to be very, very critical of paranormal claims. And surprise, surprise, they came to two different conclusions. Utz concluded that there was evidence of genuine psychic functioning. Hyman was not convinced by that, but he did say there was some interesting effects in the database that did require taking seriously. The other question they've been asked was, did this have potential as a practical application in intelligence gathering? And really, neither of them felt that it did.
During the edit of our documentary, the CIA released a large amount of documents into the public domain, including those that detailed Uri Geller's controlled tests at Stanford. Contained within these documents were telepathic drawing tests. Geller would remain in one location, whilst the tester would produce drawings in another, then placing the drawings in a sealed envelope. Whilst not every drawing is a direct hit, the accuracy displayed is astonishing.
There are remote viewing programs going on as we speak in secret laboratories that belong to defense departments of quite a few countries. Don't believe skeptics who tell you that there's no more psychic programs. Of course there are. I believe that we bring in very powerful, important secret information that technology cannot bring in. It does work. And it just simply went underground. It went deep black. That's all.
I did a TV bit with a remote viewer called Dr. Carr. It was very interesting. I mean, it's difficult to distinguish remote viewing from, say, telepathy or clairvoyance. It all seems to be pretty much the same thing. But what was fascinating was, here's a guy, he teaches it, he's a big name in that world, so he's a good person to, he's an appropriate person to validate it or otherwise. And in the experiment, we sent somebody out somewhere in London where they would look at something. I didn't know where they were going, so I couldn't in any way influence anything, and he certainly didn't know. And they would stare at something and he would pick up whatever impressions he could. And for an hour and a half, he spoke and threw out whatever impressions he was getting. He wrote over 100 pages of drawings and odd words and things. And after an hour and a half, he stopped it, he was done and exhausted, we all were, and this girl came back, and she'd been looking at the fountain, the horse fountains on Piccadilly Circus, whatever it's called. And of course, with an hour and a half's worth of stuff that he'd said and 100 pages of drawings, there was one that sort of vaguely looked like, I mean, literally just like it could have been a mountain range as well, just that, the four things. He'd mentioned wet 6 times, and he had mentioned fountain once, but he'd also mentioned, I think, church-like and an archway or other things 6 times as well. So it was easy when you try and find a story within that to go, yes, that's kind of sort of successful. The girl was sort of convinced by it. She sort of said 55-60% convinced. But when you actually looked at what had been said, there was nothing. It would have covered any single landmark anywhere in London. And this is, I mean, he was a lovely chap, but, it wasn't convincing. I think he probably did believe in it. If not, he's happy to, put in an hour and a half of just talking nonsense. But yeah, it just really wasn't very convincing. And it's sadly, it's always the same story. This is the thing. It's not only can it never be reproduced under any sort of controlled conditions, but it's just always very disappointing. I have to work so much harder as someone who debunks these things, whether it's remote viewing or mediums. I have to be a lot more convincing than they actually are in real life. Because if you're performing to an audience of believers, if you're in a bit of a closed world, you don't have to do that magician's equivalent of showing there's nothing up your sleeves. You don't have to disprove that you might be cheating. You can just pretty much say anything and rely on people making it fit. And I think remote viewing just seems to fall into that same sort of muddy, foggy trap of that, but it certainly was not a convincing demonstration.
The psychic readings that you had in the studio and in that shop that you went to were all wildly inaccurate. And I think some of the reason for that is the fact that you're talking to British mediums and your upbringing, if your formative years was not in Britain. So you would miss all of those cultural cues that mediums normally pick up on, like, your granddad used to smoke a pipe, or your grandma used to sew doilies or something like that. That's wholly relevant to somebody living in this country and would have a certain hit rate when they're talking to you. However, if you grew up in Turkey, those things would not be the same. And that's why I think these mediums struggle, because I don't believe that they're in contact with the spirit world. I think they're working off cold reading cues and cultural bias, both of which come under fire when you're talking to somebody who's not from your culture. So you struggle with those cues.
I find it difficult to understand, because that person, I assume the people that we've worked with, they wouldn't be earning a lot of money. They could actually get an everyday job that's much more easier, much more reliable. Why, especially the experience we've had with psychic readings has been so disappointing. I just can't understand it. It's beyond me to understand. I can understand people who really believe in it and they think they're doing good and they're doing someone well. I'm saying it's not right, but I can understand them. But how come with people who know that they can't do it and they still want to do it? I just can't understand. Why would someone want to do that?
Well, imagine that you were doing these cold reading techniques unconsciously, and it didn't really dawn on you that you were deceiving people. So you actually, when you talk to people about the spirits, you are genuinely having some feelings like, and I would say it was imagination, but these things come up like, oh, your grandma used to have a pair of red shoes. Like 1 out of 5 times that might be the case, and the person might go, yeah. So the psychic might then themselves start believing that they do have a genuine psychic power. Then as they go on, these cold reading techniques become more honed in, more sophisticated. So after a number of years, this person almost unconsciously has got extremely good at cold reading people. Doesn't mean they're psychic, and it doesn't mean that they realise they're doing it, but they are. Nearing the end of our journey, we discovered one more idea that could explain all of the strange phenomena that we investigated, and maybe even redefine our entire existence. This idea, though, has its roots not in the paranormal, but in science. Could the paranormal be nothing more than a glitch in a very complicated system?
Is reality all it seems to be? Is our existence really physical? Or is it, as the simulation hypothesis suggests, an advanced computer simulation of what we perceive as reality? The basic idea points to the rapid growth and acceleration of computing power within our present civilization. In 40 years, we have seen computer games evolve from the very basic Pong to the lush, multifaceted environments of today's games, made possible by hugely more powerful and compact console units. What would have taken a whole room of computer banks to process in 1960 can now be done on a handheld phone hundreds of times over in a fraction of the time. Imagine what could be achieved in 10,000 years. Perhaps, as the theory suggests, a simulation so flawless and comprehensive that we are unable to tell that it is a simulation at all. Now imagine that this progress has already been made, and that our present reality is the result. Could we be nothing more than a very advanced goldfish bowl being observed by unseen creators? From there, you can propose that perhaps these creators are also operating within a simulation. Where does it stop? How long before we create similar environments and artificial intelligences? And when we do, will our observers decide it's time to pull the plug?
One of the age-old arguments that has been stumping quantum physicists and theologians for many years is, do we live in a material-based reality or a non-material-based reality? And this goes back as far as Democritus and Plato, where Plato said, well, no, we don't live in a world made up of small little particles that clump together as molecules and then as material things. That isn't how it happens. We live in a world that is thought-based, essentially pointing towards consciousness as the primary driver of material reality. Now, if you go on the other side of that, and this comes all the way from Democritus through Galileo, through Sir Isaac Newton, everybody is focused in the last, especially the 20th century, on the material-based level of reality. The world is made up of solid objects called atoms. Well, we now know that that isn't true. Every single credible scientist understands that if you try to construct an argument that the world is real, you hit a brick wall. From our perspective, it looks real. Our senses are telling us that, this is real. But if we go in a little closer, we find out it's not. We go in and we see, oh, this is actually skin, and then we go in deep, we find out it's made up of cells, then we go deeper into the cells and we find out it's made up of billions of tiny little particles, and we go deeper in and then we find out it's at the atomic structure and then the subatomic structure. And if you were to take a mini camera and shrink it down and go flying around the inside of an atom, what would you discover? Nothing. There's actually nothing there. The material base of reality is so small, 99.9 to the power of 6% nothing, energy. In fact, if you were to take all of the human beings on planet Earth and take out the nothing and just reduce it down to the actual physical substance, the entire mass of humanity would fit into a sugar cube. So what are we? Is this real? It's real because my senses are telling me it's real? No, not at all. It's real because at the energetic level, something is happening. Now, there's a very good parallel to that we are already aware of, and it's called computer games. If you were to play a computer game, then you would see in your visual effects on screen the only thing that would be streaming into your awareness. So if you were to walk into a castle on your computer game and your figure was walking into the castle, you're walking into the entrance, but the kitchen was on the right. Now, you wouldn't see the kitchen on your computer screen, but if you moved your figure to the right and went into the kitchen, into this virtual castle, it would appear in front of you. We now know that's exactly what happens in this world at a material level. What we observe is what's on our screen. When we're not looking at it, it exists in a state of possibility. Now, every time I turn my character right in that basement, it's going to go into the kitchen. It's always there because it's been coded that way. Every time I walk upstairs into my bedroom, it's there because it's been coded that way. But if we perceive that the bedroom is there when we're not looking at it, we're just not up to speed with the latest in quantum science, because that is what's been bemusing scientists for the last 100 years. And we now know that we have a model to understand it called the virtual model. So when people first come across the concept of us living in a virtual reality, in a virtual construct, if you like, very similar to a computer game, one of the first questions they ask is, well, who put us here? Are we literally being in a machine where we're plugged in to feed some Matrix-style artificial intelligence? Well, I don't think so. I think the energy that creates us, that brings us here, has a larger word in science that, again, is very confusing. It's called consciousness. It's our consciousness that is driving this experience. And there's many different ways to look at it. In fact, one of the popular modes of science right now that's picking up ground is something called biocentrism, which essentially means that your world is a projection of your consciousness. The truth with a capital T is very simple. We don't know the truth. We have limitations as to our awareness.
If we were living in a simulation, there would have been a start point. Now, scientists have struggled with the idea of the Big Bang because they'd be, well, where did the Big Bang come from? You know, how did it start? So in terms of a digital Big Bang, it makes a lot of sense because any computer simulation that we have, like The Sims or Grand Theft Auto, there's nothing of that universe until you click on the button. So you can take that forward and imagine that our universe is that PlayStation environment, obviously a lot more advanced. But it makes a lot more sense because then you can understand that before that Big Bang, there wasn't anything because the button hadn't been pushed.
It almost proves that there was a more intelligent or bigger being who created us. Don't you think so?
Yes, I do, and I think that's one of the biggest problems or kind of dichotomies with the argument of the simulation theory for most scientists, because most scientists are atheists. But then if you subscribe to the simulation model, it becomes quite troubling because then all of a sudden you do have to accept the possibility or the probability of a higher power or a higher intelligence or a creator. And that has to become a reality at that point. And I think that's something that a lot of scientists and people, myself included, struggle with because it goes against everything that you've come to think of at that point. It's hard to quantify what we've seen and heard. Searching for the truth in the realms of the paranormal seems to be an impossible task. For every expert in one field, there seems to be an opposite authority at the other end with equally compelling arguments. Maybe the reason we struggle to find a definitive answer is that every experience or happening is open to interpretation. And as humans, we look at things in distinct and different ways.
Our own subjective experience is not always, however convincing it is, the actual best way of judging whether a thing is true. We think it is. It's often the worst possible criterion for judging the truth of something.
It's been a really amazing journey, and starting as a believer and given all the evidence, I have become more cynical in certain aspects of my beliefs and probably more open on other ideas. I mean, the notion that anyone's viewpoint or school of thinking has all the answers seems impossible now. I mean, just because one instance of phenomena is proven to be fake doesn't mean that all of them are.
You stop anyone in Oxford Street, from 100 people, 90 will tell you, oh yes, I had déjà vu, oh yeah, I had telepathy, oh, I believe in life after death, I've seen a ghost, I've seen UFOs. We're all intuitives, which means we are psychics. We have certain psychic ability.
Even after everything we've seen, I still think a lot of what we perceive to be supernatural events are just anomalies in our universe that we are not yet equipped to understand.
I think as humans, our desire to understand reality currently outweighs our ability to understand it. When we started out this journey, I wasn't really sure what I was expecting to find out or to discover about myself or about other phenomena. I really wanted to see something that I was skeptical about actually happen. I wanted to have my mind changed. And to a certain extent, a few things have happened, a few things I've seen have altered my opinion to an extent, but I don't think that they've changed my mind. So if somebody was to say to you now, do you believe more or do you believe less than when you came into this? What would you say?
I believe more, but I believe more in different things.
Now, more than ever, I think that as humans we crave purpose and meaning, and if we can't find it, we'll create or embellish something, anything to fill that void. One thing we have discovered along the way is that everyone has an opinion or a story about the supernatural. It's a theme that seems to permeate every culture, and one thing that we can be sure of is that it's not going to disappear anytime soon.